Inner Chaos by Grevin Hades. Chapter 22 Mind Games. That was the only sound heard in the extended care unit of the Ponyville Hospital, 2 days after the disastrous events of Grevin's latest encounter. He now lay in a coma, an oxygen tube under his nose and an IV in his arm, wearing a simple hospital gown under a thin layer of sheets and a blanket. The room was empty, except for the various pieces of medical equipment and the heart monitor, as well as a small plant in the window, and the pony sitting at his bedside, watching him silently. Fluttershy sighed as she shifted in her seat, her eyes never leaving his face, even as the occasional tear fell onto her cheek. She had his free hand held in her hoof, gently patting it every now and then, hoping he could tell that she was there, trying to help him get better. She couldn't help but notice how his face had regained its color, and the cuts that had covered his body had all but healed, thanks to some divine intervention. He almost looked peaceful in his slumber. She couldn't help but let her mind wander through the memories of events that led her to where she is now. She had been with her friends, watching the emergency room doctors working on the man for nearly 45 minutes when they heard a small commotion coming from outside the waiting area. They all had just turned their heads when the doors burst open, and in trotted not only Princess Celestia, but Princess Luna as well, the latter of the two wearing a very worried expression. Princess Celestia explained that the moment they had received Twilight's letter, they had immediately called for carriage and had rushed to Ponyville. They stated that Grevin's very nature made typical of healing magic a little less effective than more powerful forms, and while the doctors had been making progress, they would be able to speed things along quite well. They explained that since Grevin was a spectral knight, he still had a duty to protect Equestria from threats, including the newest one that put him in the hospital in the first place. Fluttershy couldn't help but notice, though, that as Princess Celestia spoke, Princess Luna had made her way to the observation window and placed a hoof lightly against it, the look in her eyes showing the pain only one who held feelings for another could have. A small twinge of jealousy rang out in her chest, but she ignored it, knowing that this was neither the time nor the place for such things. Celestia had called out to Luna, telling her that the time had come, and the two quickly made their way into the operating room. The two stood on either side of Grevin, only briefly looking at him before leaning their heads down and gently placing the tips of their horns above his prone form. They closed their eyes, and within seconds, a white glow began to emanate from their horns, filling the room with white light. The light began to grow brighter and brighter, before it shifted from their horns onto Grevin's body, and the results were almost immediate. The blood that was dripping from his wounds began to slow, then cease, followed by those same wounds seeming to close up and heal, leaving only a few visible scars on his flesh. His color began to return to his skin, and the heart monitor began to show an increased and far steadier heartbeat. Within 5 minutes, the princesses stopped their magic, and, as the light faded from the room, they stepped back, revealing Grevin to be in stable condition. The princesses allowed the doctors to resume their work, and they stepped back out into the observation area, both looking no worse for wear, but Princess Luna did seem to have a forlorn look in her eyes. Applejack quickly approached the two and kneeled for a moment before speaking.
"Thank you kindly for your help, princesses. Does this mean Raven will be back on the farm in no time?"
Celestia closed her eyes and sighed, shaking her head a moment.
"No, my little ponies, I'm afraid not. While his physical wounds may be healed, I couldn't help but notice that, as Luna and I worked, something felt off about him."
She turned to her trusted student.
"Twilight, you said that he used a far more intense version of a spell on the filly Sweetie Belle, correct?"
Twilight nodded, stepping forward.
"Yes, it was almost as though I could feel the very essence of his magic coming off of him. It seemed to fill the whole room, enveloping every pony in it, It felt warm, safe, comforting even, like it was telling me everything was going to be all right. I hadn't felt anything like that since those times I had nightmares back in the School of Magic, and you helped me with them.
She turned and looked back at the man, who was now being moved onto a fresh bed.
He pushed so hard to make that spell, to make it happen. I don't know how he did it. It had to be incredibly difficult.
Luna sighed and stepped forward.
'Tis quite simple, Twilight. He used a deep-seated magic that wasn't available to him prior to this day. Perhaps a magic that he was never meant to have access to. He wasn't ready to use it, and as such he ended up using a portion of his life energy to complete his task. By doing this, he has forced himself into a coma, and it seems that only he can pull himself out of it.
That news had not gone over well at all, and it was decided from that moment on, Grevin would not have a moment alone. The main 6 separated into 12-hour shifts, beginning with Rarity, who insisted on taking the time with him to create a custom hospital gown which he now wore. Next was Applejack, who spent a majority of her time talking about how the Apple Bloom and the other Cutie Mark Crusaders were planning on giving him an honorary membership to their club and a picnic as a thank you. The next morning the task fell to Rainbow Dash, who ended up reading him stories of Daring Do and regaling him with tales of the Wonderbolts. She was certain that he had loved all of it. And then came Fluttershy, who simply sat with him and occasionally would tell him words of encouragement to help him get better. Things seemed to be fairly calm for the cream-colored mare, until she heard a small grunt escape Grevin's lips. She blinked and quickly flapped her wings to hover closer to him, uncertain as to what she had heard. Seconds later he whimpered again, but this time his face seemed to contort, and a grimace ever so briefly. Fluttershy couldn't help but feel both extreme joy at this, but at the same time great concern. He was showing some sort of mental activity, but if he was in pain, she needed to find a way to help him. She glanced around a moment, noting that the ward was all but empty thanks to the vacancy of stallions in the village, and she quickly remembered that sometimes her animals would simply like to be held in order to help them feel better. Within moments, she came to a decision. She slowed her wing flapping and gently placed herself over his torso, making certain to put her hooves on either side of him. Then, she slowly sat down, letting her rump sit against his waist, and her tail trailing down along his legs, and then laid her barrel down on him, letting her head rest against his collar. A small smile came across her lips as she felt the steady movement of his chest, rising and falling with each breath he took, and she decided to give in to her personal pleasures for just a moment. She slowly leaned her head into the crook of his neck and took a long, slow breath, pulling his natural scent into her nose, a small shudder shifting down her form. She let her mouth open and darted her tongue against his neck slightly, tasting him before she leaned in further and placed a soft kiss there as well. Instantly, a familiar little tingle began to make itself known between her legs, and her cheeks became very flushed. She knew that the heat was almost there, and she mentally kicked herself for giving in to her petty desires, while he was fighting for his very life. Still, she did enjoy how comfortable his chest was. Her comfort didn't last long, though, when the door burst open, startling her wings splaying open with a pomp, causing her to lose her balance and fall off the side of the bed to the ground below. Twilight quickly rushed in, with an excited look in her eyes.
Fluttershy, I think I may know how to help Grevin. Fluttershy?
She began looking around for her friend.
Where did he go?
Slowly, Fluttershy peeked her head out from behind the bed, a sheepish little smile on her face.
Hi, Twilight.
Grevin grunted as he slowly sat up, his hand automatically reaching for the back of his head, holding it as it throbbed. He took a few slow breaths and waited for the pain to pass before slowly opening his eyes enough to get a small glance of his surroundings. He found himself sitting in a simple bedroom that was clearly decorated by someone who enjoyed making people feel comfortable. The dresser that sat across from the bed had some clothes on it, and there were a few simple hanging plants in the corners of the room, giving it a nice, natural feeling. The window had a simple blue curtain, and the sounds of birds chirping could be heard just outside. Grevin quickly looked down at his arms, hands, and chest, trying to see if there were any signs of his wounds he had earned when he was last awake, and, much to his surprise, there were none. He quickly tore back the covers to the bed and inspected his legs and stomach, once more noting that even his old scars were gone. It made no sense to him. His thoughts were interrupted when the door to his room began to open, and a soft voice called out cheerily, "Good morning. How are you doing today? Oh my." A blue pony mare, carrying what appeared to be a tray holding a bowl of water and a washcloth, had begun to enter the room. However, the moment she saw his blankets and sheets pulled back, revealing his full body to her, she quickly turned her head, shut her eyes, and had begun to blush. "Mr. Hades, I didn't realize you were awake." Grevin reacted as he normally would, and quickly covered himself with the blankets, making certain to put extra covers over his midsection. I'm terribly sorry. I didn't mean to show off anything." The mare turned and continued on her way inside, her blush still evident on her cheeks. "It's quite all right. If I were a stallion with something like that to show off, I'd show it off too." She giggled a bit and began to move about the room, as though she had done it many times before, ignoring the bright blush that had formed on the man's face. Grevin took the opportunity to look at the mare, noticing that she was a light shade of blue, with a brown, straight mane. She had a few freckles, nothing too noticeable, and her eyes were a dark shade of brown as well. She wore what appeared to be a nurse's uniform, and her cutie mark was a red cross with a blood-filled syringe next to it. She turned her from her current task and smirked as she faced him, her eyes becoming half-lidded, a sly smirk coming across her lips. "Mr. Hades, I could have sworn you were looking at my cutie mark." She moved forward, causing him to lay back with each step. "Were you?" He blinked, but quietly nodded. Well, yes, I just happened to glance at it. I meant no offense, if that is something that is socially wrong, miss." She smiled and moved her head closer to his. "I'm Nurse Stickum, but I prefer to be called Nurse Poke. It's less intimidating that way." He nodded. "I can see that. So, why am I here?" She rolled her eyes at his obvious decision to change the subject, and turned back to the water bowl. "I'm surprised you don't remember. You were fighting as you knights tend to, and then ended up being wounded. You've been in the hospital for several days now, unconscious, and we've been tending to your needs daily." He frowned a bit as he watched her with careful eyes. "Why am I not covered in scars? Even my old scars are gone. How?" She smiled and turned back to face him, after she dipped the cloth into the water basin. "Quite simple, really. Our healing magic can do wonderful things. We saw how torn up you were, and it was decided to remove any blemishes you have." He blinked and glanced at the claw she held in her hoof. "What is that for?" She blinked before giggling once again. "Mr. Hades, you've been laying here unconscious for a few days now, and you've begun to take on a rather unique odor. I'm here to give you your bath." She trotted over and took a bit of his blanket into her mouth, pulling back on it only to have him quickly grasp it and hold it in place. I think I can do that for myself now that I'm awake." She glanced up at him with a small glare and shook her head, trying to pull the covers back once more, before stepping back.
I'm trying to do my job here. Why are you resisting?
He frowned and pulled the sheets up further. Because I'm awake now and can bathe myself. If you would be so kind as to give me the cloth and leave the room, I'll take care of it and get dressed as quickly as possible. She took a small step back and closed her eyes.
No.
Grevin felt the air begin to grow cold as the light from the window began to fade, casting the room in dark shadow. He slowly moved himself off the bed, using the blanket as a makeshift covering, while never moving his eyes off the mare. I'm sorry. What did you say? He watched with wide eyes as a thick red substance began to drip from the mare's mouth, ending up in puddles on the floor. Slowly, small cuts began to run across her face and neck, dripping more and more of the thick crimson to the ground.
I said no.
He narrowed his eyes as she spoke, noticing that her teeth had changed into sharp, dangerous-looking fangs, and her voice seemed to grow darker, sending a chill down his spine. He slowly began to move to the side, hoping he could circle around her and get to the clothes that sat on the dresser. Would you care to explain to me why not? She began to tilt her head to the side as she followed the sound of his voice, a sick smile beginning to form on her lips.
Because...
Her eyes snapped open, revealing that her cute brown eyes had been replaced by black ones, with small red irises.
I want to play with you. Don't you want to play?
Grevin didn't answer as he threw the sheets he carried at the mare, catching her off guard as they covered her eyes. He used the distraction to run for his clothing, grabbing it and running out the door, while he heard the mare growl and hiss as she tried to escape from under the cloth. He glanced over his shoulder as he ran down the hallway after hallway, the nondescript walls making him feel as though he were running in place and not getting anywhere. There were several unopened doors and no sign of any other ponies, so he quickly picked a random door and ducked inside, slamming it shut behind him, putting his back against the door. He closed his eyes and took a few deep breaths, trying to gather his wits and control his breathing before beginning to dress himself. He just pulled on his shirt when the soft clip-clop of hooves began to near the door. He quickly pressed his back against the side of the wall and held his breath as it moved closer and closer, slowing to a halt just outside.
Come on out wherever you are, Grevin. I won't hurt you. I'm a nurse. I want to help you feel good.
The mare's demonic, multi-toned voice called out sweetly. He didn't dare move. He didn't dare breathe, lest the creature locate him. He needed to find a way out, and quickly. He glanced around the room, noticing that it was very similar to the room he woke up in. There was a bed, dresser, and 2 chairs, as well as a large window. Patered. He silently stepped toward the window and glanced out, seeing that if he were to jump, he would fall the equivalent of 2 stories. If he used his training correctly and kept his balance, he may end up fairly okay if he were to jump.
Grevin!
The mare sing-songed.
I can smell you. I can smell your fear. Come on out. I know you're here. I won't hurt you. I promise.
Glancing over his shoulder, he made his choice. Grevin grabbed a mattress off the bed and braced himself as he ran to the window. Using the mattress as a shield, he broke through the glass and fell to the earth below, landing on it with a solid thunk, knocking the wind from him, forcing a wheezing groan to escape his lips. He felt his ribs ache from the landing, but knowing time was of the essence, he slowly rose to his feet and gathered his wits, taking note of his location. He was in Ponyville, but it seemed deserted. There were no ponies at all, not a soul in sight. It was eerily calm and far too quiet. The local shops appeared ready for business as well, not a bit of dust visible on the windows. He broke into a run, making his way towards the town hall, his heavy footsteps and breathing the only sound until... Grevin! He glanced back over his shoulder, locating the source of the evil, blood-chilling scream to see the demonic mare from before, sticking her head out the window, screaming at him from the building, her hoof pointed at him as if to say that she would eventually hunt him down. He shook his head and quickened his pace, leaving her and the building in the distance. He couldn't help but notice that as he ran, he felt as though he were carrying an extra weight in his chest. He felt slow and sluggish, which confounded him since he didn't have any armor or weapons on. It was as though there was a weight on his chest, forcing his heart to work harder and his lungs to strain for air. This whole scenario made no sense to him. If he were in a nightmare, he would still have a weapon, or his armor, or even his cloak. But here he had a shirt, trousers, and some shoes. Nothing more. There were no ponies around to interact with him. Hell, even his friends weren't there. This was something more than a dream. But what? A vision? A hallucination? He ducked inside the large town hall and collapsed just inside the doorway, resting his back against the wall and sliding down into a sitting position. He closed his eyes and rested his head back as he caught his breath, his heartbeat thudding in his eardrums. He glanced outside once more, taking care not to step too far out of the shadows, taking note of the various paths and alleys he could take if he needed to make a quick exit. While he was focusing attention there, though, he never noticed a hoof inching towards him, coming up from behind, until it tapped him twice on the shoulder. Grevin quickly turned, grabbing the hoof and its owner, using his momentum to slam them against the wall, holding them there with his elbow driven into their back.
"Ugh! Grevin, let me go,"
spoke a very familiar voice that belonged to none other than Twilight Sparkle. Grevin blinked and quickly stepped back from the mare as she turned and rubbed her leg, shooting him a small frown.
"What was that for?"
He said nothing for a moment as he ran his eyes over her form, doing his best to see if she was another twisted figment of his imagination. "Sorry, I'm a little jumpy. Are you all right?" She nodded as she sat down.
"I'm fine. A little sore, but fine. Are you all right?"
He nodded, still keeping his guard up. "I'm just peachy. Where is everyone? Why is it so desolate here?" Twilight sighed as she looked down.
It all started after you fought with Davik. He ended up coming back, and with you in the hospital, no one could stand against him."
Grevin shook his head as he clenched his fist. "Bullshit. He wasn't in any real condition to fight."
"What?"
She looked at him with wide eyes. Her jaw dropped slightly.
"I'm telling you the truth."
He again shook his head. "Twilight, you carry the elements of harmony. From what I've been told, those things can do just about anything. To top that off, you have three Alicorn princesses who wield strong magic, and a freaking dragon. How the hell do you expect me to believe that all that was ineffective against one monster of a man?" Twilight blinked and slowly lowered her head once more, as tears began to fall from her eyes, a small sob escaping her.
He had some sort of amulet that protected him from our magic. Discord must have given it to him. He killed Luna, Celestia, Cadence, my brother, and he killed Spike.
I'm sorry." He reached out only for her to smack his hand away as she turned her face from his, her tears running down her cheeks. How did you and the others survive?" She snapped her head back up and looked at him.
"We ran. We hid. We're all that's left. He took as many ponies as he could get his hands on and casted some strange spell on them. Turned them into monsters, bent them into twisted, perverted versions of themselves.
How many? She sighed and looked away once more.
I don't know. 10s? Maybe hundreds of ponies? Some act as his lieutenants, ready to act as loyal pets to him.
And how did you know to find me here? She turned to face him once more, her eyes downcast.
Honestly, I didn't. We all knew that you were still in the hospital when everything happened, and we figured that he wouldn't kill you because he would want to face you one-on-one. We mounted a rescue mission as soon as we could, but you beat us to the punch. We arrived just as we heard that monstrous pony scream out your name from the window on the second floor. I think every pony in a 10-mile radius heard it, actually. We all decided that in order to find you, we should spread out and look for you. The plan was to meet up again at Sweet Apple Acres in an hour.
He reached out and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, only to have the mare surge forward and wrap her hooves around his torso, resting her head on his shoulder. Her body began to shake as tears came over her again, her sobs breaking his heart. Slowly, Grevin slid his arms around her and held her tightly, while gently stroking her mane. Shh. It's okay now, Twilight. I'm going to help, I promise. I'll make Davik pay for what he has done. She nodded and slowly pulled back as she composed herself.
We should get moving. It will be nightfall soon, and we don't want to be out in town when it's dark. The girls are going to be thrilled to see you again.
Twilight rolled her eyes at her timid friend as she helped her to her hooves.
Okay, what were you doing back there, Fluttershy? Well, I noticed Grevin didn't look comfortable.
Comfortable?
Yes, he was grunting and wincing like he was hurting or in pain. I couldn't let that continue. I thought about how I would comfort my animals when they were in pain by holding them, and thought I could help Grevin that way, but...
Twilight raised her hoof, motioning for the timid Pegasus to continue. But...
Well, I knew I couldn't exactly hold him, so I thought I could lay with him?
She smiled a bit, her eyes seeming to shimmer with innocence.
So I flew up and lay down beside him.
Twilight quirked an eyebrow before glancing over to the man in the bed.
You just lay there with him?
Fluttershy nodded.
Oh yes, it was quite comfortable. He seemed to calm down even.
She quickly ducked under her hair and kept her gaze to the floor as her cheeks reddened.
Was that all right?
Twilight glanced back at her friend, noticing her red cheeks, a small smirk coming to her lips.
Of course it is, Fluttershy. But I want to know what else you did.
Fluttershy gasped and took a small step backward, even as her wings began to extend ever so slightly.
I did, but I didn't mean to. Oh, I'm sorry.
Twilight giggled and rolled her eyes once more.
You snuck in a kiss, didn't you? Only on his collar. Oh.
Fluttershy quickly clamped her hooves over her mouth, her cheeks burning red now. Twilight smiled and looked over at Grevin, watching his slow, steady breathing.
Was it good?
Fluttershy blinked before following her friend's gaze and nodded slightly.
Yes, his scent is strong, and I couldn't help but want to lick a bit of his sweat and give him a small kiss. Oh, I'm a bad pony, Twilight.
Twilight shook her head.
No, you're not, Fluttershy. You simply gave in to some temptation. We all do that from time to time, especially since the heat is getting close. I wonder if they'll wake up and recover before it happens.
Twilight blinked and shook her head, as her mind brought her back to the reason she was there in the first place.
I almost forgot. I think I may have a way of helping Grevin.
Fluttershy grinned and jumped up, her wings flapping vigorously.
Really? What is it? Well, I thought that maybe since Princess Luna can enter pony streams, then maybe she could enter Grevin's coma and help guide him out of it. I also have a theory that the elements of harmony could be used to allow us to help him. That's a great idea. We should go and get the others right away. Oh, and we should send a message to Princess Luna.
Twilight nodded.
I already sent a note to the princesses, and she should be coming by later tonight, after she raises the moon. Come on, let's go find the rest of the girls and tell them the idea.
The lavender pony turned and began to move toward the door, only to stop for a moment and glance over his shoulder at the man lying in the bed. Fluttershy looked at her friend in confusion.
Twilight? Are you alright?
Twilight nodded as a small smile moved over her face. She turned and trotted over to Grevin and rose onto her back hooves, allowing her to lean over his prone form. Slowly, she leaned down and pressed her nose to his chest, inhaling as she took in his scent, then turned her head and placed a soft kiss on his lips, her tail flicking back and forth, each passing second. Slowly she backed away and returned to her friend, a small smirk on her lips.
I couldn't help myself. Come on, let's go.
The two ran out the door, their mission clear. Back in the room, however, Grevin began to grunt and groan once more, a grimace washing over his face. Grevin found himself following Twilight as the day began to turn to dusk, an unsettling feeling moving through him, but he chose to ignore it. The two made their way towards the barn, where they found the rest of the main six, sitting together in the loft bedroom in silence. 5 sets of eyes snapped up and looked at him as he took one more step up the stairs, while he gave a small wave. Hi, girls. He noticed that these ponies all seemed to be shells of their former selves, almost like they had given up any hope. Their eyes were downcast. No smiles rested on their faces. Even Pinkie Pie's mane was as straight as it could be. A small sigh escaped him as he moved to the center of the room and cleared his throat. I heard what happened, and I'm sorry. I should have been there to help. Rarity shook her head as she rose up and moved closer to him, placing a gentle hoof on his hand.
No, darling. There wasn't anything you could have done. You were unconscious, badly hurt. You had no idea what was happening.
Applejack nodded slowly.
She's right, Sugar Cube. It ain't your fault.
Rainbow Dash smiled and rose into the air.
But now that you're back, we can kick Davic's butt and take back our home.
Twilight nodded.
That's right. We'll start planning tomorrow. But for right now, I think we need to celebrate.
A small smirk came across her lips as she glanced over to Pinkie Pie, whose mane quivered as she looked up from the floor.
Right, Pinkie?
The party mare smiled and nodded as her mane shifted into a slightly more curled form.
That's right. You're back now, and we need to have a party.
Rarity smirked and turned away from Grevin, moving towards her friend.
Yes, dear, but what kind of party can we have with no food or favors? What kind of party does that leave?
Pinkie grinned and leaned forward, pressing her lips against the white unicorns, causing her to blink in surprise, before slowly closing her eyes and pressing back into the kiss with a small moan. Both ponies moved closer to one another as they parted their lips, and Grevin could see that their tongues were locked in a battle for dominance. Seconds later, the two broke their kiss, and Rarity turned her head, looking over her shoulder at Grevin, her eyes smoldering with what could only be described as pure animalistic lust.
Oh, that kind of party would be great fun. What do you think, Revan?
Grevin shifted nervously for a moment, before shaking his head, while he took a small step back from the white unicorn. Rarity's sultry smile only grew as she rounded back to face him, her tail flicking back and forth, the smell of her musk beginning to fill the room. I think I'd rather much get some sleep. Perhaps I'll go stay in the farmhouse and you all can have your party. He stopped moving when he felt a pair of hooves press against his back, forcing him to look behind him over his shoulder. What he saw was Pinkie Pie, grinning widely at him as she pushed him onward.
Oh, don't be such a stick in the mud, Grevy. You're the guest of honor. If you're not here, we can't celebrate properly.
Grevin frowned as he felt a pair of hooves grasp the waist of his trousers, forcing him to grip the waist with both hands, preventing them from being pulled down. Celebrate properly? What are you talking about? Pinkie giggled as she pulled her hose back away from him.
You're a male, remember? We're all female. You have a perfectly good fun stick for us to use. You're not scared of us, are you?
Rainbow Dash chuckled as she moved forward in front of his face and turned, presenting her rump to him, her tail flicking gently enough to bat him across the face with it, her personal scent washing across his nose.
Yeah, don't tell me you're intimidated by all these mares wanting to do you. Don't be such a wimp. You'll have a blast.
Grevin quickly sidestepped and moved away, holding his hands out in front of him while shaking his head. No, I'm not doing this. You're not the girls I know. They wouldn't do anything like this. Who are you? In an instant, the 6 mares before him, all staring at him with deep scowls on their faces. Each mare now had dark circles under their eyes, and their coats were a darker color than their regular shades. Applejack grinned, showing off a pair of fangs, and slowly stepped forward, the others following in step with her.
We tried to convince you to take the easy route, Revan. If you had just let us have our party, you would have felt no pain. You would have actually enjoyed yourself as you perished.
Rarity grinned as her lips took on a red hue, fangs forming in her mouth as well.
Indeed, darling. I wanted to thank you personally for helping Sweetie Belle. But now, I'm afraid things will get a bit more rough.
Fluttershy smirked and winked as she stuck out her tongue.
So, we don't mind that rough stuff if you're into that.
Grevin rolled his eyes and smacked himself in the forehead. God damn it, why the fuck does my brain always make my friends into these things? Twilight smirked as she moved closer.
You're all pent up inside and need to relax. It's your subconscious telling you that you need to get laid. Either that, or you're a pervert.
Pinkie Pie grinned.
I'm betting he's a pervert.
Grevin growled and reached out, striking a wall, causing the whole structure to shiver, and forcing the mares to halt their advance. I am not a pervert. Now tell me what the hell is going on. In an instant, he found himself surrounded by darkness, the ponies, barn, and everything with it gone. Grevin quickly glanced around as he balled his hands into fists, and he took a defensive stance. Slowly, the sound of hooves moving toward him reached his ears, and as he turned to face it, he saw Rainbow Dash slowly emerge from the dark. Her coat was even darker than before, and there were blood stains around her wingtips, and her lips, making it appear as though she were wearing bloody lipstick. Her eyes still had dark circles under them, and, as she began to speak, it was clear to him that she indeed had a pair of fangs similar to a vampire. Her eyes still had their magenta hue to them, but they seemed to be darker, like they were blood red, and as they moved over his form, he couldn't help but feel like a piece of meat being sized up before a meal.
You should have just let us have our fun, Grevin. it would have been so much less painful for you.
And what the hell is that supposed to mean?
You're in a fight for your very life, and we thought it would be enjoyable for you to have some pleasure before being extinguished. But clearly, you don't want that.
Damn right I don't. Not with you freaks. You're nothing like the mares I know. A new voice sounded from the darkness, forcing the two to turn their attention towards it. From the shadows, a new, twisted version of Pinkie Pie began to emerge. Her eyes were sunken, and her mane was long and straight. A small, twisted smirk adorned her lips, and blood seemed to drip off of her hooves, only to pool around them.
Sure we are, Grevy. We're in your head, so we know everything about you. We're just better than them because we know what makes you tick, and how to destroy it.
And why would you want to destroy the very person who supposedly created you? A soft voice sounded just next to his right ear, the warm breath of the mare speaking sending a small shiver down his back.
We don't know. Perhaps you secretly wish to die?
Grevin wheeled around, only to find a demonic form of Fluttershy several feet behind him. She stood on the ground, but her wings were spread wide. Her eyes were narrowed, and her teeth bared. Blood seemed to drip from her lips, and it also stained her mane in random places.
Maybe the darker half of you wants to just kill you since you refuse to let it be a part of you. Maybe you secretly wish you had just finished the job that night in Bastion and finished cutting your wrists. You're just a pathetic bastard that couldn't make the hard choice, that wouldn't fall through with the path you chose.
Grevin growled and shook his head, standing up straight once more. No, I don't wish to die. I don't regret my life. I regret my past, but nothing can change that. All I can do is try to focus on the present and future.
And what a fine job you've done with that, Sugar Cube.
Grevin turned once more to find Applejack approaching him, anger showing on her face. Her mane was untied, and her eyes seemed to be crying tears of blood, staining her cheeks as they fell.
Because of you, my sister and her friends were almost killed, not to mention those poor folks in Canterlot. Some help you are.
That wasn't my fault.
Spoken like a coward, unwilling to accept his responsibilities.
It was twilight this time, and she again appeared to be in a demonic version of her Nightmare Night costume. Her lips were blood red, and her eyes began to take on an eerie glow.
Of course it was your fault. It all came from your mind. Even we come from your depraved subconscious.
No, this is some kind of twisted magic being used on me. I'm not responsible for the actions of Discord.
If you had just been more aware of your mind, then we wouldn't have to worry about him. But no, you just had to let him pull those things out and into the open. A real warrior would have had 0 casualties in battle. You're pathetic, useless, terrible, stupid.
No! Grevin pulled his hands up to his ears, trying to block out the ever-increasing volume of the mare's voices. But nothing seemed to stop the 5 doppelgangers from berating him again and again, driving him to his knees until they suddenly stopped, and the only sound that could be heard was the soft clip-clop of hooves moving closer and closer to him, stopping just before his face. Slowly, Grevin raised his eyes upward to find that Rarity was now directly before him, smiling softly. She had a few stitches running across her legs, barrel, and face, her eyes seeming to pierce into his very soul.
Oh, Grevin, I'm sorry that the others were being so mean to you. Would you let me make it all better?
Slowly, he let his hand slide from his face. Better? She smiled again, and nodded as she stuck out her tongue a bit before winking.
Yes, I can make you feel all better. I'll make it all go away. Would you like that?
She slowly knelt down and moved her muscle to his neck, nibbling at his skin softly before running her tongue across him, tasting him.
Oh, I know I'd enjoy it.
He hesitated, his hands resting at his sides now. What would you do? She smirked and began to push him onto his back, noting that he gave no resistance to her. Slowly, she began to move over him, all while nibbling at his lips.
I'd help you rest, after some fun, that is. Isn't that what you want? Don't you want to rest, and no longer have to worry? No longer feel pain?
He couldn't think straight. Something was wrong. He knew he needed to resist, but he didn't feel any need to. It was as though he was losing his will to fight. His eyes snapped up as Rarity moved over him and sat on his waist, wiggling her rump against him. As she did so, and he saw the remaining members of the main six walk up, surrounding him, each of them grinning sinisterly.
That's it, Greven. Let us help you slip into oblivion peacefully. No need to fight.
The main six had gathered together in the hospital room and had been discussing Twilight's idea amongst themselves.
So, let me get this right. We can use the elements to pull our friend out of his coma.
Twilight nodded.
Yes, Dash. I believe that if we focus our power into him, we'll be able to lead Greven's mind back to us.
Sugar Cube, not to be a negative Nancy, but what if it doesn't work and it turns him to stone like it did Discord?
No problem. If it does that, we'll just use them again to undo it. But it shouldn't happen either. We can control what the magic does.
Their conversation was interrupted when the medical equipment hooked up to their friend began to beep, and red lights began to flash all over them. The sound of hooves running down the hall drew their attention to the door, where two doctors and a nurse burst in, brushing past the main six, and immediately began to work on Greven. Rarity gasped and stepped back a few inches to avoid being run over.
Oh my, what's going on? What's happened?
The nurse grimaced and began to usher the mares out of the room.
Your friend is beginning to crash. If we don't stabilize him soon, he could die. You need to clear out so we can work. Please, I'll do my best to keep you informed.
The mares all looked at one another with great concern in their eyes as the door shut behind them, followed by the hurried talking of doctors and the various alarms beeping and chiming, warning after warning. Twilight's eyes began to water as she turned and began to move to a nearby waiting room, the rest of the girls falling in line behind her.
What if we're too late?
Applejack shook her head as she moved past the lavender mare.
I can't unlock this for him. He's too tough to go out like that.
Fluttershy stomped her hoof down, startling the bunch, drawing their eyes to her.
No! You listen to me. That man will not die here. Not now, not today. I believe in him. I believe in his strength, and you should too.
Rainbow Dash smiled and nodded.
Fluttershy is right. What kind of friends would we be if we were to give up on him now?
Pinkie Pie smiled and bounced in place.
Right. I bet he's already beginning to improve and will wake up any time soon.
Twilight frowned and looked away.
I'm sorry, girls.
She glanced at the equally downtrodden Applejack.
We were wrong. We shouldn't give up hope yet.
Rarity smiled and stepped forward.
That's the spirit, darlings. Now we just have to figure out a way to help him.
Perhaps we can help you with that, my little ponies, came a nurturing, calming voice from behind the doorway, causing the group to turn around quickly. There stood the two alicorn princesses, Celestia and Luna, both wearing sympathetic smiles on their faces. Twilight immediately ran to her mentor, her hope reviving with every step.
Princess Celestia, Princess Luna, thank goodness you came. We need your help again.
Luna nodded and turned to look down the hallway, where she could hear the sound of alarms and the shouting of doctors.
Tell us what has happened, and quickly.
Pinkie Pie jumped up and began to wave her arms emphatically.
Twilight had a great idea about using the elements of harmony to help heal Grevin and decided to run over to the hospital to tell every pony, which caused her to barge in on Fluttershy, who was trying to comfort Grevin when he looked like he was in pain. Fluttershy was going to get all hubba hubba with him, but Twilight startled her, causing her to fall off the bed, and when she asked Twilight why she was there, she explained everything to Twilight. Then they ran off after giving him another kiss while Grevin fought against this inner demon, which looked like us, except all dark and mean, to find us and bring us back here. When she got us all here, she explained that she thinks the elements of harmony might let us directly pull Grevin out of his coma, which is so smart and totally cool. I didn't know they could do that, and well, Twilight didn't either. It's all a theory, to be honest, but it's a really good theory. And anyways, while we were talking, all these alarms started beeping and wailing. It was like, wee-oo, dee, 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 and so loud and scary the doctor ponies came rushing in, and the next thing we know, we're here in the waiting room feeling all gloomy, and when you come in here saying, perhaps we can help you, my little ponies, and we're all like, woohoo, the princesses are here, and they can help our friend. Then you asked us to tell you what happened, and I told you that Twilight had a great idea about using the elements of
Twilight jammed her hoof into her friend's mouth and sighed while trying her best not to kick her friend, while Fluttershy blushed and hid herself away, and Rainbow Dash patted her on the back.
What Pinkie Pie is trying to say is that Grevin is in trouble. I think the elements of harmony can help him out of the coma, but before we could try it, I wanted to ask you if you think it would work. However, before we could do anything, Grevin's vitals began to drop and we were kicked out of the room. We don't know what's going wrong with him.
Luna closed her eyes, a faint hue coming to her horn for a few moments before fading away. She opened her eyes once again and turned to face the group, a frown on her lips.
I do. He's losing the battle within himself.
Rainbow Dash frowned as she crossed her arms over her chest.
And what does that mean?
Celestia sighed as she moved into the room.
We healed his physical wounds, but Grevin has gone through more psychological trauma than he has let on. His mind has taken the trauma he's experienced and shoved it deep within his subconscious, nearly purging it from his waking mind. However, these experiences somehow seem to have become some sort of entity over the years, and they are lashing out at their owner, most likely as nightmares at first, which, due to Grevin's unique physiology, made it difficult for Luna to help him. So now, in Grevin's own mind, a portion of his very soul seems to be attacking him. Right now, he's in a battle for his life, and if he loses, then he will perish.
Applejack frowned.
Wait, I don't understand. You healed his body, so how can this hurt him?
Luna frowned and took a small, calming breath.
The mind can be a very powerful tool. It can come up with amazing things and think up incredible evil. But fear not, I believe we can help him.
How? Luna smiled as she began to leave the room.
I will enter his dream world and try to guide him out of the coma.
Celestia quickly stomped a hoof down and shook her head.
I say nay, sister. That is a foolish plan. You have never done anything like that before. What if you become injured? What if your mind becomes trapped? Why would you take such a risk?
Luna smiled softly over her shoulder at her sister, an odd calmness about her.
Tia?
Celestia froze and visibly softened, a small smile gracing her lips.
I see. Very well then. While you two try to guide Grevin, we shall prepare the elements of harmony, and then shall assist you.
Luna nodded as she quickly moved down the hall, and all but barged into Grevin's room.
Very well, sister. Let us make haste.
Luna forcefully opened the door, brushing past the nurse who had turned to see what the noise was, and quickly pushed one of the doctors out of the way.
Please step back. There's a way to resolve the situation, but simple healing magic will not be the way.
She took a moment to look at Grevin's face before closing her eyes and leaning her head down. She blocked out all outside distractions and focused on her task. A simple blue aura enveloping her horn. She gently placed her horn against Grevin's forehead, and, for an instant, there was a blinding flash of light. Grevin grunted as he weakly reached up and pushed the mare above him in a feeble attempt to get away from her. He had almost given into the temptation being given to him, but he managed to hold out and regain his senses. He was still weak, though, but despite that, he felt an odd calmness that seemed to be enveloping him, like a warm blanket on a cold night. His body continued to weaken, while his mind slowly became more and more aware of the danger he was in. He had managed to push the fake rarity off of him, so she was no longer pressing into his hips, but she continued to lean down and tried to nibble at his neck and ear. He could also feel the hooves of the others brush over his arms and legs from time to time, causing him to try and weakly kick them away. It seemed that no matter how much he resisted, he couldn't wake himself up from this nightmare.
Oh, no, get off of me, stop. No, I won't let you do this.
He heard a soft chuckle in his ear, and a tongue lightly brush across his cheek, making him shudder with disgust.
Oh, I don't think you have a choice now, Grevy.
Pinkie Pie lightly nipped at his earlobe, tugging on it roughly.
After all, you're too weak to fight back.
He mustered as much strength as he could and jammed his head to the side, striking the fake party pony's face with a strong crack, earning a cry of pain from his target. He felt a small surge of joy as he heard her whimper, but it didn't last long because he felt another pony grab hold of his arm and pull his wrist to her lips, where she began to bite down, her fangs driving into his veins, making him cry out in pain. Another pony took hold of his leg with their magic, twisting it until the pressure was too great, and a loud snap sounded as his leg broke, fiery pain shooting through him, making his eyes water. Grevin could feel his strength leaving him with every passing second. This was it. He was going to die, and he would fail everyone he cared about. He felt his legs go limp, and his head hit the ground with a soft thud, a simple phrase leaving him with a gasp.
I'm so sorry.
There was suddenly a bright flash of light that blinded him and forced the demonic ponies to release him while they covered their faces and backed away, hissing as they went. Grevin weakly raised his head to see what had caused the creatures to leave, and what he saw baffled him. There were two sources of light, the first being a ball of bright energy that was slowly descending to the ground, and the other was the largest, fullest moon he had ever seen in his life.
The moon. Luna?
The ball of energy began to pulse as it slowed its descent and made its way over to the fallen warrior, its glow warming him to the very core and restoring some of his strength, allowing him to rise up on an elbow.
Who are you? What's happening?
The ball of light began to circle him for a few moments, as if it were inspecting him, then stopped at his side, where it began to glow brighter and brighter. Within seconds, the light was so intense, Grevin had to look away, and as he did, there was a shattering sound followed by the soft tinkle of glass falling to the floor. Then there was silence, until...
Hello, Sir Hades.
Grevin snapped his head back, around, eyes wide with surprise, as he found Princess Luna smiling back at him, her blue eyes brimming with happy tears.
It's good to see you. We've been worried.
Grevin blinked a few moments before breaking out into a smile and wrapping his arms around the lunar princess.
It's you. It's really you, right?
She gave him a soft smile as she let her wing wrap around him before speaking.
It's really me. I'm here to help you wake up.
He slowly sat up, pulling away from her as he did so.
Does this mean I'm simply asleep? And all of this? All of them?
He pointed to the now glaring demonic six.
Are figments of my imagination? Is this just a nightmare?
In a manner. Your troubled past has always made things difficult for you, and this is no different, except you are in a coma. I hope to help you wake up and return you to the land of the living. However, together we can push this nightmare away and allow you to wake up once more. The evil Applejack glared and stomped her hoof down, pawing at the ground as she stared at Luna. And just what makes you think we're going to let you saddle up and take our prize away from us? Luna turned her back to Grevin and faced the mares, her eyes flashing pure white with power as her wings flared outward. I am Princess of the Night, the Princess of Dreams. I know your tricks, vile creatures. You're nothing more than a manifestation of his inner demons, attempting to torture your host. You're nothing against me. The six mares glared as their eyes became blood red, and they lined up, all ready to attack Luna. She, however, simply smirked and stuck out her tongue, causing them to hiss with anger. If you think we're going to back down to a weak princess like you, you're dead wrong. We will do as we wish. This is our realm, no one else's. The six mares all charged forward, each screaming a battle cry. Closer and closer they came, but Luna did nothing more than smirk as she glanced up at the sky. Pathetic. Celestia watched her sister intently, as the glow of her horn seemed to fluctuate ever so slightly, the main six wearing their elements filing into the room behind her. She turned and looked at Twilight, a small frown on her lips. Are you ready to use the elements? Twilight nodded as she glanced at her friend in the bed. Yes, we know what we need to do, and we know what to focus on. The two's conversation was cut short when the alarms began to sound once more, clearly showing that Grevin's pulse was slowing to a very dangerous level. Celestia said nothing, and only nodded to her trusted student, who looked at her friends. Okay, girls, remember, we all want to help him, so focus on that. Twilight and the rest closed their eyes, and within seconds, their elements began to glow with magical power, filling the room with light before the gems suddenly shot out a beam of magical energy at Grevin, enveloping the man in its glow. Just as the demonic six were within 15 feet of the two, another blinding flash of light filled the area, forcing them to skid to a halt. It almost seemed to form a barrier around Luna and Grevin, protecting them from harm and filling them with life and pleasant feelings. Grevin slowly rose to his feet, using Luna as a balance, and looked up to see not just one ball of light, but six now, rushing down from the sky, all pulsing in a synchronous rhythm. It's almost as though they are all of one heart. What is this? Grevin looked over to Luna, confusion showing on his face before looking back to the sky. Luna smirked and nodded. You could say that. They are, and they all beat together with the goal of helping someone they care about deeply. He glanced over at her, curious as to what she meant, but she said nothing, and motioned for him to watch the orbs once more. The six orbs danced about one another as they descended, their pulsing growing faster and faster as they moved. With each passing second, they moved faster, their light becoming nearly blinding as they touched the ground in a line in front of Luna and Grevin. As the light began to fade, Grevin's jaw dropped from surprise before a small smile began to form on his lips. I'll be damned. He could only stare at as 6 pony-like outlines began to develop and then take shape, revealing the main 6 standing before them, each one smirking in confidence, ready to deal with their dark counterparts. Except for Pinkie Pie, who turned back to flash a bright grin at the princess and warrior, waving her hoof energetically.
Hiya!
The rest of the main 6 couldn't help but giggle as Grevin returned the wave with a small gesture of his hand. Hi, Pinkie. The dark twilight sparkle growled and stomped her hoof down, once more drawing the group's attention to her.
No, there are to be no more interlopers. Be gone from this place.
Applejack shook her head as she leaned down, ready to charge forward.
No can do, you varmints. You try to hurt our friend, and that just isn't something we can let happen.
The demonic Applejack snickered.
If you think you can stop us, you're sadly mistaken. You can hurt a fly.
The evil Fluttershy laughed as she rose to the air.
My counterpart is such a timid thing that I know she'll just whimper and hide while I destroy.
The evil mare never got a chance to finish her sentence, due to a cream-colored blur crossing the distance between her and the main 6, slamming into her. Fluttershy only growled as she drove her back hoof into the mare's stomach, knocking the wind from her and forcing her to the ground.
How dare you! How dare you take my likeness, my face, and use it to hurt him! You monsters!
For a single second, it was so silent that they could hear a pin drop. Then, instantly, they were on one another. Grevin could barely keep track of it all as he watched the 2 rainbow dashes duel in the air, while the 2 twilights began to fight, using spells back and forth. Grevin couldn't help but be surprised at how well the Dark 6 were holding up against their originals, when he realized something. This was taking place in his mind, and the Dark 6 were a part of his subconscious. As he watched them fight, his subconscious would be able to look at their fighting styles, and in time analyze them. This would let the Dark 6 slowly gain an advantage, which he couldn't allow, so he did the only thing possible. He closed his eyes and called out to Luna. Luna, go help them. I'll be fine. But they need help. If this really is taking place inside my mind, I can't watch them fight. Luna smirked and nodded as she gently patted a hoof onto his back before launching into the air to aid Rainbow Dash. She was proud that even when he was in danger, Grevin never stopped thinking. It was a trait she could admire. Grevin kept his eyes shut and hoped that his friends were victorious. From what he could tell, it was a vicious battle. He could hear the sound of hooves striking flesh, different cries of pain from ponies who had been struck, as well as the battle cries of some of the more vocal mares and a cannon? However, after 15 minutes, the sounds of fighting faded, and then there was silence. Grevin slowly began to open his eyes, and what greeted him brought a smile to his face. There, in a pile, lay the unconscious forms of the Dark 6, all of whom were clearly beaten senseless. The main 6, including Princess Luna, were moving over to him, each one smiling and looking a little worse for wear. He let his hands rest at his sides as he moved forward. Please tell me that this is over. Luna smiled and nodded as she and the 6 others began to fade from view.
It is. The elements of harmony have helped you beat back your inner demons this day, and now a single task remains. You need to wake up.
Very well. Grevin smiled and waved as his friends disappeared from view, leaving him alone once more. He chuckled a little bit as he realized that he felt a little bit more at peace with himself than in the past. Perhaps the elements did more good than he realized. Without a second thought, he allowed himself to close his eyes and fell backwards, embracing the sensation until he came to a stop on a very soft surface. In the small hospital room, 6 ponies, 2 princesses, 2 doctors, and 1 nurse all stood holding their breath as they stared at the man who was lying in the bed, the only sound being the steady chirp of the heart monitor, which had stabilized moments before. Luna glanced over at her sister, knowing that while her subjects couldn't tell, Celestia would easily be able to see her nervousness. Celestia simply smiled at her sister, as she ever so slightly nodded towards Grevin. Luna quickly looked back over and waited until a sign of hope finally appeared. Slowly, Grevin's eyelids began to flutter, and his hands began to move, a soft groan escaping his lips. The room all but erupted with cheers as the man's eyes slowly opened, and he brought up a hand to shield them against the bright ceiling lights. He took a slow glance around the room before his eyes landed on Celestia, and he let his head fall back and his hand drop.
Oh, what happened?
His voice was weak and gravelly from lack of water. Celestia stepped forward and placed a hoof on his arm, forcing him to look up at her.
You gave all your friends a terrible fright, Sir Hades. Welcome back to the waking world.
He looked around once more, seeing the bright smiles of his friends, some of whom had tears in their eyes. He gave a small nod and coughed in an attempt to clear his throat, only to have the nurse trot out of the room, stating that she would get some water and food for him. Within moments, he was surrounded on all sides by the girls, while Celestia moved back and watched as he was pulled into the largest group hug she had ever seen. She laughed softly and leaned in to join the group, earning a laugh from Pinkie Pie. As they pulled back, Grevin rubbed the back of his head and moved to sit up.
I don't remember much. I remember Davik threatening the girls. I remember fighting him.
His eyes widened as he looked over at Applejack, then Twilight, and finally Rarity, a sad frown coming to his lips.
I remember what I did. The way I let out my former self. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have allowed my dark nature to come through like that. If I've frightened you, I understand, and I will make certain to distance myself from you if I make you uncomfortable.
Applejack and Twilight both began to step forward, only to have Rarity push past them and hop up onto the bed. She moved so she straddled him and walked straight up to his face, forcing him to move backward to the point that he was laying flat once more.
Mr. Hades, if you think that for one instant that you going through that little change and suddenly becoming so violent is going to make us see you in a different light, you are sorely mistaken. I and the others owe you a large debt of gratitude that will most likely never be repaid for what you did. You saved our sisters, you saved us, and you defeated a despicable ruffian who was going to try and destroy our homes. If doing all that required you to become violent, then so be it.
She leaned in further, pressing her forehead against his, to the point that she could stare directly into his eyes, and her hot breath was washing over his face.
So stop thinking you're so poorly of yourself this instant. You are our spectral knight after all. Your job is to protect us and all of Equestria from danger, and you are not a danger to us.
She took several breaths and slowly pulled herself back, as her cheeks began to flush. She quickly hopped down and flicked her mane out of her eyes.
I'm certain all the girls agree with me on that, as do the princesses.
Luna smirked and nodded.
I agree wholeheartedly. You have once again proven yourself to be worthy of your title, Grevin.
Celestia smiled and placed a hoof on her sister's shoulder.
Indeed. You've indeed earned the title of Spectral Knight.
He nodded quietly as he sat up once more.
Oh, all right. I'm sorry. I'm still curious about something, though. How did I end up in the hospital?
Twilight blinked and shook her head in disbelief.
You don't remember?
He shook his head.
No, I don't. I remember trying to heal the girls, but my memory is fuzzy at best.
He glanced at Rarity as his eyes widened in fear.
Is Sweetie Belle? Is she...
Rarity grinned and shook her head, much to his relief.
No, darling, you saved her. You're her and my knight in shining armor. Or I guess I should say hospital gown.
She giggled a bit at her joke. Grevin nodded and smiled as he saw Celestia approach him. Your Highness? Celestia smirked and shook her head.
Please, call me Celestia.
Very well, Celestia. She smiled warmly and nodded.
Better. Now, Grevin, we don't know what exactly happened in the ruins. Twilight told us that your healing magic reached a new level, unlike anything seen before. Sweetie Belle was all but dead, and you pulled her back, at the cost of your own life energy. We have never seen any magic like this in Equestria, so we can only assume that it is some kind of ability from your world. Perhaps a part of your heritage. Maybe some deep-rooted magic that only the most highly trained individuals could learn and control. It appears that you are not quite ready for that level of magic, and as a result, it put you in a coma.
Luna stepped forward, moving in front of her sister.
Somehow the darkness in your mind and soul seemed to take over after that and put you in mortal danger. You were beginning to die as your soul seemed to battle against itself. I and the element bearers used our magic to link to your mind and soul, and we did our best to help you. Clearly, our efforts succeeded.
He blinked and raised a hand to make her pause. Wait, so you all were in my head? She nodded.
I was, but the element bearers could only send representations of themselves due to the nature of the elements of harmony. Why I recall everything, they do not. Most likely you will remember things, even if they are a bit, as some would say, fuzzy.
I see. I'm sorry to have scared you all. I'm actually feeling quite well now. Perhaps I should consider leaving?
Celestia smirked and shook her head. Oh, I don't think so. You need to spend at least 2 nights here for observation until you are released.
He sighed and sat back. Very well, but I have a feeling I'm going to be quite bored.
Celestia simply smiled. Maybe, maybe not.
The group sat and talked with him for another hour and a half before being forced to leave by Nurse Redheart. They all waved and said their goodbyes before stepping out of the room and shutting the door, leaving him in silence. Celestia turned to Luna, a soft look in her eyes.
Well, sister, shall we return to Canterlot?
Luna nodded.
Indeed.
She turned to Twilight and her friends.
May you all take care of one another and rest well this evening. Know that your dreams will be peaceful and calm. Farewell, my friends.
Twilight and the gang waved goodbye as they left, and Luna quickly fell into step with her elder sister.
Tia, do you think it's wise to leave Grevin here in Ponyville in its current condition? You know how things can get during this time of month.
Celestia grinned, a small chuckle escaping her.
I think you may be more interested in having him in the castle with you during it, Luna. Don't forget, he is a knight. He is strong, and he is completely healed of all physical wounds. Now he needs to get past some of his psychological troubles, including how to deal with the opposite sex.
Luna frowned.
But isn't this a bit extreme? Sometimes that is what it takes. Does it bother you that much?
Luna blushed and turned her head away.
No, I was simply wondering if you might need a little guidance. Perhaps a tutor?
Celestia stopped mid-stride and looked at her sister with mock surprise.
Luna, are you saying that what I think you're saying? You want me to teach Grevin the way to properly... Tia!
Luna's cheeks were lit up bright now, a scowl on her face as she stomped a hoof down. Celestia giggled and wiggled her hips slightly.
What? He's cute, and in a way so very innocent. I wouldn't mind teaching him a few things if you wish me to.
Luna growled and lowered her head, turning so she could continue her walk to the chariot. You're not funny. Celestia smiled and followed her sister.
Luna, if you wish to stay, you can.
Luna paused and looked back at her sister, then at the hospital, a longing look in her eyes. She sighed and slowly shook her head, a soft smile coming to her lips.
No, it's quite all right. He's in good hooves, and he won't be hurt. There will be other times.
Celestia smiled and wrapped a wing around her little sister.
That's very noble of you, Luna. Though, I am curious. Perhaps after you've had your fill, so to speak, perhaps you'd be willing to share your prize?
Luna's face turned red once more, and she pulled back from her sister.
Tia!
Celestia laughed as they approached the carriage.
Gotcha.
It had been several hours since his friends had left, and Grevin was now sitting quietly in his room, bored to tears. He hated not being able to do anything, especially with Davik still being out there somewhere. He could be training, strategizing, stumping, but no, he had to sit there. He shifted in his bed for a few moments before a small yawn hit him, reminding him that he still did need to sleep, though he knew he had had plenty of that over the past few days. He couldn't help but wonder what the next step would be for him. Discord had promised 2 surprises, and so far Davik only counted as one to him, so what else could follow? Perhaps one of Davik's generals? Or, if he were lucky, his mentor, though that would be very unlikely. He shook his head and glanced out his window, noting that there seemed to be several ponies out on the streets that evening. Perhaps some kind of party was being held, most likely celebrating the safe return of the 3 Cutie Mark Crusaders. He looked away and rested his hands behind his head, closing his eyes. He had to admit that he missed the day-to-day work of the apple farm, and he was looking forward to returning to that peaceful place. As he began to fall asleep, a single thought passed through his mind, a hope that tomorrow would pass at a far quicker pace. A few hours later, Grevin woke up quietly, without opening his eyes. His breathing was slow and even. Something had woke him up, but he wasn't sure what. He listened quietly to the room, noting that the normal beeps and the sounds of the room's medical equipment and the air conditioner, but beneath all that, he heard something else. The soft breathing of someone who was in the room with him. He opened his eyes and tried to sit up, only to find that his hands wouldn't budge, and his eyes were met with darkness. Somehow he had been bound and his eyes were covered. He pulled at his hands once, noticing the soft cloth wrapped around his wrists, as well as something else. He felt a unique tingle against his skin from the cloth, telling him that it had been imbued with some sort of magical energy. It was being magically enhanced. Whoever wanted him bound knew exactly what to do. He grit his teeth and grunted as he began to struggle, while the soft hoof steps of whoever was in the room with him moved closer to the edge of the bed. Suddenly, he felt a soft hoof rest itself on his chest, rubbing over him gently, as if the pony attached to it wanted him to feel relaxed. "Who are you? What is the meaning of this?" A soft giggle sounded to his left, telling him that there was at least one mare in the room with him, perhaps others. He couldn't tell now. He felt a hoof slide up his chest to his neck, then his cheek, pausing there while he felt movement near his arm. "I don't know who you are, but if you let me up now, I'll let you simply walk away." He shivered when he felt a gust of warm breath wash over his neck and ear, followed by the soft sensation of lips trailing across his skin. The mare paused a moment before uttering a simple sound, then lightly nibbling his ear. "Shh." Griffin tried to pull his head to the right, only to have the lips follow him, planting little kisses down his collar as it did. He felt his cheeks begin to redden as he felt the soft coat of whoever was there, their breathing deep and heavy. He also noticed a slight scent in the air, a kind of musky scent that seemed to get more of a reaction out of him than he would have liked. He could feel his member beginning to stir at the sensations this mare was giving him. The mare nipped at his shoulder before kissing her way down towards his chest, taking a moment to stop at his hospital gown. For a moment Grevin thought that she would stop there, but he felt her take hold of the cloth in her teeth and quickly rip the fabric away, exposing most of his flesh to the cool air. He then felt her lightly run the tip of her tongue over his chest, moving down towards his stomach, ending it with a light kiss before speaking in a whisper.
I won't hurt you.
He felt the mare pull the remains of the gown down around his waist, leaving his member covered, and then he felt the bed shift as she climbed up and joined him. He could tell that she was standing over him, straddling his form, her tail brushing up and down his legs for a few moments, the tickling sensation teasing him. He growled a bit and pulled at his bonds once more. The voice he heard sounded somewhat familiar, but due to her whispering, he wasn't able to completely identify who was in the room with him.
What do you want, then? Why are you here? Who are you?
He heard her giggle once more as she laid herself down against him, her coat warm and soft against his bare skin. She pushed herself against him slowly, letting out a slight moan as she moved her face over his, her breath sweet and warm. He felt it wash over his lips as a simple phrase left her mouth before she pressed down against him in a fierce kiss.
You. I want you.
Grevin tried to pull back from the kiss, but found that his head was already flush against the mattress, and the mare had placed a pair of hooves on his cheeks, holding him still. As the seconds passed, he couldn't help but notice that the kiss wasn't forceful, but instead passionate and heated. He could almost feel the emotion behind it, and, ever so slowly, he relaxed and slightly parted his lips, earning a small moan from the mare above him. She pressed down against him, her hips grinding into his as she darted her tongue into his mouth, playfully wrestling with his. A few moments later, the two broke apart, gasping for breath, and she took the opportunity to grind her rump hard against him, earning a small groan for her troubles. Grevin couldn't believe what was happening. Here was mysterious mare in this hospital room, kissing and writhing against him. He could feel the heat from her loins through the thin gown that still covered him, his own member hardening due to her teasing. It seemed too bizarre to him, yet every sensation, every nip, every kiss was making him grow harder, almost to the point it hurt. He pulled at his hands once more as he felt her slowly push her hind end down his legs, her lips trailing little nips and bites down his collar then chest.
Who are you?
Let me see. He felt the mare pause for a moment before kissing the center of his chest once more, her hooves running down his shoulders and arms.
You sure?
He nodded quietly, his cheeks burning now.
Yes.
He felt the mare push up on his chest, pulling herself up his body, her wet hot sex brushing across his stomach. Now, as she settled herself above him, he felt a soft hoof brush across his cheek, and a slight lick on his neck, followed by a few small kisses.
Really?
He nodded once more as he swallowed the small lump that formed in his throat.
Yes, please.
He felt her laugh softly as she continued to grind herself against him, letting her wet slits leave a small trail of moisture over his stomach and leg as she began to slide back down his body.